Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Bill Schnee. He is an engineer, producer, mixer. What else?
Husband,
Father, studio owner, so therefore masochist.
Evidently.
Your list of credits is. I had to jot some of these down because I just couldn't remember them all. But short list: Steely Dan, Barbra Streisand, Carly Simon, Gladys Knight, Three Dog Night, Ringo, Marvin Gaye, Whitney Houston, Art Garfunkel, Pablo Cruz, Boz Scaggs, Neil Diamond, Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits, The Jacksons, George Benson, The Pointer Sisters, Huey Lewis. I'm sure I've left out a couple, but generally speaking, I would say
Marvin Gaye and the Chipmunks.
Marvin Gaye and the Chipmunks.
Yeah.
Now
no
that's
one ever
impressive.
Many people mention Marvin Gaye, but no one ever says Chipmunks.
I did not realize that you had. So how was Alvin to work with anyway?
No, he was fine.
I'll bet. Yeah. Was there helium involved?
No. All I did was mix. I didn't get to meet the little guys.
Oh, too bad. Yeah. But you really have had quite the stellar, if not circumlocucious kind of career in terms of the stuff you've done.
Yeah, I'm very blessed, and in many, many ways. And I love all forms of music, all genres of music. And I've been very, very fortunate to work and have success in all genres of music, which is rather unusual in the record business. They like to put you in a box and not let you out. And the cute part of that story is when I started, I came out of a rock studio, Richie Podler's American Recording. I came out of a rock studio, so people thought of me as the rock guy. Very soon thereafter, I did all the Beatles. I did Carly Simon, and all of a sudden now I was, more pop or something. And so, 8-9 years later, I couldn't get a rock act if I tried. It's kind of funny.
And it is funny that you went all over the musical map, especially, I mean, your background, I think you originally had classical training, right?
No, not really. I had piano lessons, but that didn't work.
Oh.
It was, I have a very good ear, and it was, you've heard it before. I would get him, he'd put a piece of music in front of me, and how does it go? And he'd play it, and I'd be watching, and then I'd pretend like I was reading it. I was trying to read it as I went with what my ear was telling me. But unfortunately, and like many people that gave up, I wish I hadn't.
But were you then one of those, what's that old stereotypical joke about how you get a guitar player to turn down, you put sheet music in front of them? Yeah.
Yeah, basically. I mean, fortunately now I can read music well enough to be doing sessions and work with musicians and so on and so forth. But the playing stopped fairly quickly for me. I managed to pop as an engineer real quickly, and as a result, I was working with the very best keyboard players in Los Angeles, and
you saw the writing on the wall and decided that was the career. So you had some success, what, 17, 18 years old, something like that?
Well, I don't know I guess you'd call it some kind of success.
You made a record.
Yes.
Before your singer developed lead singer disease, you made a record,
yes.
Right?
Yeah. So my parents moved to Los Angeles from San Francisco for my senior year of high school. And I met some guys that were starting a band, and I asked if they thought an organ would work. And they said, sure. And we got together and started doing things that young bands do, including going into a demo studio and recording 4 or 5 of our songs that we had written. And one of the parents knew someone who knew someone that was in the music business. And so we got a name and an address, and we sent them off to Gary Usher. Gary was, he was friends with the Beach Boys in their neighborhood. In fact, he wanted to be a Beach Boy. He didn't get
Didn't
there.
everyone?
Huh?
Didn't everyone?
Yeah. But he did write 2 of their big hits, 409 and In My Room with Brian.
Oh, wow.
He had just made a production deal with Decca Records, and he called us in for a meeting, and he said, I like your songs, and this one is a hit, and they signed us. Actually, it was the B-side that charted, funny enough. In those days, that could happen.
Yeah,
And the B-side started taking off. And in fact, my wife did a cute thing that she found a chart listing from a radio station where we're like number 14 and the Beatles are like 17. And
as you do.
we
Yeah.
were probably peaking and they were on their way to number one, but
Mm.
at least for that moment, we were ahead of them.
Details.
Details.
Yeah. But what that band did serve to do, obviously, was entice you into the studio world in that sense.
Absolutely. Gary took us to Capitol to record, and we did one organ solo I did at Western Studio 3, which I was a huge Beach Boys fan.
Mm.
And so being in that room was very intimidating. But we recorded in those two studios. And on our first session at Capitol, he brought in a session guitarist to augment us, a guy named Richie Podler, who was a phenomenal guitar player. Turned out he was also a phenomenal engineer and producer. And he had built a new studio. He'd built two before. This was his third studio. And when we got dropped from Decca, I went over to his studio and said, told him the sad news. And he said, "Oh, you guys were really good, as I remember. Well, here, go see this guy, Mike Curb. I'm friends with him. He'll sign you on my word. He's going to go places." And he wasn't wrong
You
about
think?
that, and wrong about a lot of things. He was not wrong about much. And so
He had quite the track record himself. Yeah.
so we went into Richie's studio with the band to record. And when I came in for the first playback, what I heard coming out of those 604s on utility cabinets and a compression ceiling was there was something different than
The
what
voice
I'd
of
heard in those
God.
other great studios. There was an
Mhm.
emotional content and I realized right then that what the sound could do. So much so that I turned to Richie when the song was over and I said, "Can you teach me how to do this?" And he said, "No, I'm teaching Cooper here. Go out and do another take." And that was that. But that aha moment, as I've called it did set me in motion for the rest of my life.
The interesting thing there also to me is the whole left brain, right brain kind of thing, where there are a lot of musicians who are, as you described yourself, highly intuitive. Even though, obviously when we're learning an instrument, there's a lot of left brain involvement, but at a certain point, that right brain intuitiveness takes over. And yet you found also the capacity to embrace more of the left-brained engineering side of things.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm half left-handed and half right-handed.
So, as am I.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Interesting. You play guitar right-handed?
not ambidextrous.
No,
Right?
no,
No,
selectively.
selectively.
Yes.
And maybe that
Interesting.
goes with the left brain and the right brain, and how it's worked very, very well for me.
Mhm.
All of my uh, grades in high school were in math and science. In fact, when I entered college, I entered as aerospace engineer, and ended up quitting for 2.5 years and chasing the band. But yeah, and it seems to have served me pretty well.
Mhm.
Of course, I do have the odd occasion there where the left brain starts thinking too much and tells,
Sure.
is telling the right brain what to do. Yeah, I've had to learn how to fight that, but
Well, especially with mixing,
exactly.
because it's such a balance
Exactly.
there of tech and intuition in that sense.
And there's that balance, and then there's good old insecurity, which I have more than a giant dosage of.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, well, I honestly think most creative people are.
Oh,
It
I
doesn't
have
matter,
to
and the
agree.
success level doesn't seem to matter.
I've spoken to some highly successful people who have admitted to me that I've been doing this for, X number of decades, and yet I'm still deathly afraid that someone's going to open my studio door one day and say, "You have no idea what you're doing."
Yeah, I don't need anyone to tell me that. I keep questioning myself.
Well, and I think that's part also of being autodidactic, self-taught in everything we do, because we have no barometer of whether or not we're doing it right, because we're just figuring it out as we go. And then because we're figuring it out as we go, if it comes really easily, we think we must be cheating. We must be missing something. The real people who do this for real, they know something we don't. That's what it is.
And
Yeah.
indeed, a good part of it did come very, very easily for me. But you bring up something that really has me concerned these days with young people coming up, is that there's so much uh, video online to teach them how to do stuff. And I watch some of these, and it seems like they're getting, obviously it's a much more technical world than it was 55 years ago when I was starting. The fact that we're in a computer. But it seems like so much of the teaching goes to that instead of, at the end of the day, the most important thing is having music that works in a digital, as in binary, as in either they like it or they don't kind of fashion, because I believe that's how people listen to music, the average person. Those of us behind the scenes will tendency to dissect. But the average person just doesn't dissect it usually. That something catches their ear and they like or they don't like.
But one thing that occurs to me is that we consume music differently now. And that, there was a time when people really listened to music as an active activity. And now I think it's much more of a background and a passive. Um, so I don't know, a lot of that probably has to do with attention span and everything. But you brought up another interesting point, which is that, yes, there is so much of this online to be learned. What bothers me about that is that there's no gatekeeper, there's no filter. And so you're learning this from a lot of different people who may be qualified, may not be qualified. I was fortunate in my days in the studio, which was, mid to late 80s, to look over the shoulders of some really great producers. And one of the things that I saw in Phil Ramone, Peter Asher, Don Was, people like that, was this ability to make the technology disappear. It was all about the performance, and it was all about getting that performance, getting that quote unquote magic happening. And I think that's something that's kind of hard to quantify in terms of teaching somebody. I don't know if it's just you have it or you don't, but
I think when it comes to mixing, I think you have it or you don't. I've always thought that my favorite engineers are all really good at balance. It's just an instinct kind of thing. You can't really teach that. You either, you know. But you mentioned looking over shoulders, and that, of course, in the old way of doing things, that's what it was, because it was the studio business, and anyone wanted in, they did anything they could to get in the door, to clean the toilets or whatever, answer phones, make coffee, do whatever, and then spend enough time to learn enough about that they could go in the control room and assist an engineer. And that's where it really, the rubber met the road, because you were able to sit there and watch one quote master after another and see how they do everything, and and listen to what's going on. And so you have a bag of tricks in your mind when you get ready to start. And as you point out, now the things today, first of all, there's too much, and you don't know who's who. And I've been asked by several people to do some of those, and I just said, I think there's too many already. What is one more person showing how to put a mic on a drum going to do? I don't know.
I mean, there's absolutely valuable knowledge in knowing how to put that mic on the drum. There's valuable knowledge in, one of the things that you point out in your book, Al Schmidt points out in his book, is the idea of just learning how to move a microphone, for example. Those are, laws of physics that have not changed, although we have very few people now who are actually recording live musicians.
And that's the problem. That's the problem. Unfortunately, unfortunately, people are recording one instrument at a time, and many times, and not that, and not the other. And of course, and there's not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, the art has changed, and in
just
fact,
different.
yeah. In fact, I finally, uh, just a year and a half ago, produced a girl, a modern kind of artist, where I have this huge collection of vintage microphones, and the only microphone I used was a 269 on her voice. Everything else was in the box. It was sampled and put together like that. And I really enjoyed doing it. It was a lot of fun. Also, what was great fun was having a room full of great musicians playing with and off each other, where so many things can happen, including great mistakes that turn into something positive,
Yes.
over and over. It was just a phenomenal way of making music.
Well, it's funny. I taught a college class, and I realized I asked in front of the class. I said, "How many of you have been in a band?" One person out of 12. And that to me spoke to the idea that yes, you don't have any real concept of these players playing off each other. And to
Right.
me, that's part of the magic, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. I mean, every excuse me, every great engineer in my book of great engineers started as a musician, and you're absolutely right. There's invaluable knowledge that I don't know how you could teach somebody that has never done that.
It goes even beyond being a great musician, because I mean, great music guys who didn't play, like Amit and Clive Davis, people like that, there's an intuitive understanding there of, is the magic happening, and you can get that magic through piecing together parts and putting together loops and everything, but it's different. It's a different
Yeah,
art form.
well, but to that point, they're not recording and mixing.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
where I think when you start to integrate yourself on a deeper level, broad brushstrokes like those gentlemen, and they were all phenomenal. And uh, I worked with all of them. They're all brilliant, um, but getting into the trenches and actually doing it, that's a little bit of a different thing, and where
Yeah.
that knowledge of being in a band and whatnot, I think would come into play much more.
That's true. Now, you have, over the course of your career, treaded that very vast gray area between engineer, mixer, producer. That is also a balance, and it's a balancing act. And some of the artists you've worked with have been more in need of a producer at certain points in the production. Some of them are fully formed, and all they need you to do is push play or push record.
My version of that is a painter. I've likened it to that. In producing this as a painter. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So like a painter goes into somebody buys a house and says, make everything look good. And he walks into one room and he sees, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that paint. It must have been done recently. And goes into the next room. Oh yeah, that needs paint. So he'll prime it and paint it. And he goes in the next room and there's some holes. Now he's got to fill holes. So you do whatever's necessary to me. I worked with several producers that take over. And with some artists, like a Whitney Houston, all you have to do
Yeah.
is find the vehicle and put her in front of the microphone and get out of the way.
Yeah.
But well, and that's fine. That's the painted wall. You don't need to do much. Just find the song. But other artists, like you say, need a lot more attention. And especially like a young band like I did back in the '70s, Pablo Cruz.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. I'll
Yeah,
bet they needed a lot more
yeah,
input.
yeah. It's a funny story, to me funny. They had made one record, and they were on A&M. They made one record, and it made some noise, but wasn't successful, you wouldn't say. And they did a second record, and right there's a huge difference from the record business back then and now. Back then,
You
when
got to do a second record.
you got to do a second. Why? Because the record company was making a product that they sold, and if they were lucky, it made money, and everyone was happy. And now they make a product that's leased, and the money is quite different coming in, especially for the artists and songwriters. But we won't go into that. I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man. But they asked me to do the second record, actually, and when I heard the band, I didn't think they had any songs. They were just grooves, and they were great. The original bass player and drummer in that band were phenomenal together, but there were no songs. So I said to the manager, I'll be glad to come up to San Francisco and work with them, but there's no songs. We need songs to go in. And they went in with another producer and made the second record, and there were no hits. And then they sent me a year and a half later. They sent me a tape with 4 songs on it, and one of them was a song called "What You Gonna Do," and I heard right then that okay, they're ready now. And that's one of the things that is so sad about the lack of record business influence on artists today. Now that they're making the product to lease, they don't sign obviously anywhere near. I'd love to know what that fraction is, the number of artists signed in 2023 compared to the number of artists signed in 1973. But
Not to mention the longevity factor of those artists.
yeah,
Mhm.
but and now they only, back then it was all about the music, and then in '81 with MTV, then it became about the look and whatever. But back then they would do that was a third record that did with Pablo Cruz, and artists need time to develop, and A&M had worked with them all the way along. They supplied them with 3 different producers to see what might work, that kind of thing. And they've provided, record companies used to provide a lot of input on all kinds of stuff, helping them with songwriting or putting them with songwriters, and obviously putting them with producers and so on and so forth. And now, as I've said many times, the good news is anybody can go in their bedroom and make records. The bad news is everyone is going in their bedroom making records.
Yes, yes.
And
And there's no pre-production. And I think that's what you're pointing to is the value of pre-production, the value of
right,
before we go make this record, let's think it through and make sure that it's really to the point where it's worthy of recording.
yeah, absolutely. And you need someone to be doing that, called a producer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's that's an intuitive thing too, I think, for you to be able to recognize, okay, I need to be more than the knob twiddler in this particular project. You need my input here. And commensurate with that, how receptive is the artist?
Yeah,
Right? I mean, there's going to be pushback from the artist no matter what, because it's their record,
yeah,
and that's one thing that I think it takes a while to realize too, is you may do dozens and dozens of records if you have a successful career as a producer, but the artist's name is going to be on this, and the artist is going to either have a great record or not have a great record.
yeah. Which is why I'm very proud to say that I have a great relationship with everyone I've ever worked with, because as a producer, I always said their name is in big letters on the front, my name is in little letters on the back. It's their record, and I want them to be happy with it. I'll go to the mat if I think there's something really bad or wrong or that they shouldn't do, as I have done on a few occasions, unfortunately. Don't put this record out, it's a mistake. And unfortunately, I was right.
Sucks when you're right.
Yeah, worst feeling in the world. But ultimately, it's their decision. And I've sat and watched a couple. There was the great producer Tommy LaPuma.
Oh yeah.
I did quite a few records with him as an engineer and mixer. And there was one with a very, very talented girl, and it just wasn't going to work. He was trying to guide and he thought there were holes in the wall. And I'm not going to get into it whether there were or there weren't. I didn't always agree with him, but he was the producer, and he was trying to patch holes that she for sure absolutely didn't believe were there. And it was horrible.
So you've got the dynamics between the producer and the talent, and then you've got your dynamics on top of that. The last thing you want to do is get entangled.
Yeah, I'm running for cover.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but it's it's interesting to know how to gauge that. I mean, that takes a certain internal sense too, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. I think experience, of course, is the big teacher for a lot of things. And because when I started actually as an engineer, and when I had that aha moment with Richie Podler, I went off and learned how to engineer on my own. And it came, as I mentioned, very quickly, so quickly that less than 3 years later, and his studio by then had become the hottest rock studio in Los Angeles. After 2 months of begging, I convinced him to give me a job in the studio engineering. And so I started working right away with some very talented artists, but I also worked with some producers that didn't produce, that would let me or encouraged me once they found out I had something to offer musically, that pushed me into doing it. And so I with that in mind, and of course I wasn't too happy at the time sometimes because I knew I was doing all the heavy work
Right.
and not getting the
And
credit or
they're getting
payment
the
for
check
it.
while
Yeah.
they phone it in. Yeah.
But it's all part of the learning experience that we were
Yeah.
just referring to that has helped me later on. Just like when I was in my first Mickey Mouse studio after the aha moment, the first studio I was in was this not very put together studio in any way, shape, or form. And I had a mentor that was encouraging me, and I would complain, I got nothing. They had 2 condenser microphones, for instance,
Ooh.
egg cartons on the wall for sound absorption, no EQ on the 8-channel mixer. The good thing about that, however, was it was only a 2-track studio and everything was live. So when there was some ensemble with the crummy mics we had and whatnot,
You better learn it.
I had to try to make music out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would complain to my mentor about this, and he said, I know it's rough right now, but believe me, what you're learning with those not so good musicians and the not so good equipment is going to really pay off when you have really good equipment and really great musicians. And boy, was he right.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we all have to go through that in order to gain that. And it's better that you learn it on those crummy musicians,
Right.
quote unquote, than learn it under pressure. But then, you've worked with artists who I'm sure, Steely Dan, for example, you really just kind of almost just buckle in and sit back for that, don't you?
Well, here's the story on that. When Gary Katz, their producer, called me and said, we'd like you to do the next Steely Dan album. What do you think? And I said, I think that's a great idea.
Which album was this?
Asia.
That would have been Asia. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I said, that's a great idea. And he said, well, it's going to be a revolving door of drummers. So you'll be getting a new drum sound every few days. And I said, okay, that's fine. I hung up the phone and I started thinking about it. And a couple of my good friends, Michael Mardian and Jeff Porcaro, had played on their previous albums. And they had told me about their, do I say maniacal? Their ways fastidious ways of achieving the perfection that they were after.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a very patient person, so I was a little nervous, to be honest, when we finally started in the studio. But to my total surprise, that album was completely different in the way it was put together, handled, than any other album before or since. To my knowledge, it's the only album where they used nothing but professional musicians. They had used professional musicians before, obviously, Michael Martin and Jeff Porcaro, but this was all them. And it was a no-drug zone, which I also, at least the tracking was, which is all I did on Asia. And the sessions were very professional. I mean, we started at 2 o'clock every day. We never went late into the night. And it was just easy. It was nothing like what I had feared.
Maybe because you were ready for it.
But no, I mean, I was ready. I was girding up for something really rough. And I'm telling you that it was like any other, quote, union session. It was wonderful. Now, I don't know what went on. As I said, it left me after the basic tracking, which they did retrack 1 song, maybe 2. But the overdubbing process, which took months, I don't know what to say. I will say this, that the funny thing, you probably know that second engineers used to have a habit of, when everyone was gone, doing things maybe they shouldn't, like going in the vault and playing something and making copies of it. And I didn't know this until about 10 years ago, that one of the seconds on the tracking dates had gone in and made a copy of the basic tracks. So I found this out and demanded he give me a copy of them. And then I barked at him because he didn't get all of them. Couldn't you have waited till the end, but done them all? But anyway, it was great hearing them again as basic tracks, because for all of their, as you put it, fastidiousness in the months of overdubbing that they did, the basic tracks are the songs.
Sure.
They did not mess that up at all, the basic feel of what they had. The one exception is I cut a version of Peg and they recut it. So that doesn't hold. But all the rest of them, boy, I mean, the groove of all of them is just what the record was.
Oh, it's amazing.
Just amplified slightly.
Of course, you know, picking the best drummers and the best players in general probably didn't hurt, um, but yeah, I think it really seems like that record almost just got delivered,
Yeah.
you know, through
Yeah.
them, so to speak, and
Yeah.
through you all.
It was, I have to say that, you know, people say, what's the favorite thing you've ever done? I say, I'll never say what the favorite thing is because fortunately, in my case, there's too many.
Who's your favorite kid?
There is no, there is no one favorite. There've been some absolutely astounding, working with 3 of the Beatles, you know, the only time that happened after the breakup or ever would happen was a pretty magical night. And then working with Paul, he was the only one that couldn't come over because he had a drug bust. How times have changed. 72, he had a drug bust for marijuana, and
No
the
kidding.
United States wouldn't let him in the country for a year and a half. And if he hadn't had that drug bust, I look at it that on that first Ringo album that Richard Perry did and I engineered and mixed, that all the lads were giving him a leg up. And who knows that if he didn't have that drug bust, Paul might have hopped on a plane over the pond and there could have been a reunion. We'll never know. But there've been too many of those. But for sure, the Steely Dan sessions, those Asia sessions, were amazing in one sense. Every night I got in the car and popped in a cassette of what we had done. And after about the third day, I'm going, what in the world is this? I mean, you know, at the time back then, I mean, obviously that album was so far ahead of its time, which is why it's endured the way it has. But I remember saying to myself, well, it's kind of bluesy, but it certainly isn't blues. And there's sometimes a teeny bit of rock there, but I don't know what this is, but it's incredible. That's all I knew and most of them at that point, at least half didn't have vocals or complete vocals for sure on them. So I was hearing in some cases, just the tracks.
Which can be even more enlightening.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was a very special album.
You mentioned Mr. Perry. He's obviously something of a mentor to you.
Yes, very much.
At the same time, probably a foil as well, huh?
Well, he was definitely difficult to work with. He pushed like crazy. He was a pusher. So he'd have a phenomenal band out there working on a song, and you know, they'd finally get he'd come in to play back. Okay, well, we can do this and we can do that. And they'd go out and come back in after 2 more takes. Yeah, well, what if we do that? You know, it just kept going. And there's a great story that Jeff Porcaro told me on, I wasn't there, but it was a tracking session and Richard was doing that push and they came in and Jeff said, that's the take. And Richard went, yeah, that's a great take. But I think no, Richard, you don't understand. That is the take. Yeah, no, it is a great one. But one more just to try. He said, Richard, next song, I'm not going to play it again. And that was it. And he had to take it. So he was a pusher. And then when it came to mixing, which I did a tremendous amount with him, he always wanted to ride the vocal. And so that's what he would do. And unfortunately, you know, it's all one unit to me. So with somebody else, and he wasn't the smoothest with it. I mean, I don't know what he was doing with some of his moves, but that made it very, very difficult for me. I'll put it that way. But since you mentioned Asia, let me tell you the one great story, the greatest story I think about that. One day, I was told that the next day Steve Gadd was going to be playing. He just flew in and we're going to have Steve Gadd on the Asia sessions. And I went, oh, great, because I had fallen madly in love with 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, where he played that great drag snare.
Such a subtle, and his hi-hat figures especially, yes.
Yeah, that whole thing. So I was really excited about that. So he came in and we cut 2 tracks the first day with him, 2 tracks. And they were both really good. And so I happened to call Richard that night and I said, Richard, you know Steve Gadd, right? Yeah. I said, I'm recording him and he is a monster. And he said, do you think I could have a session with him? I said, well, we've only got him one more day. And he said he's going right back to New York. Well, what time do you start? Here comes the pusher.
Uh-oh.
I said, 2:00. Well, I said, all right. So I called Gary Katz and said, Richard would like to come in and do a session with Steve Gadd. And Gary was a big fan of Richard's. And but also knew his ways. And he said, okay, but you got to get him out at 1. If we don't start at 2, the boys are going to kill me for doing this. And I said, I'll turn the monitor off. Don't worry. So the next morning, in pops Richard on time, which another thing, he was never on time. He was absolutely on time, meaning he was early for the session before 10 o'clock.
Wow.
And he came in with this affable young chap, Leo Sayer. And we set up and started recording a song called You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, which, if the audience will go back and listen to that record again, you'll hear different groove, but the same, what I had fallen in love with the drag and the hi-hat thing that Steve did on 50 Ways is on that one. And not only Miracle of Miracles, we got it in 2 hours and 35 minutes, which was completely unheard of for Richard. But we got it, and everyone knew it. And Richard, of course, pushing, said, can we do another one? I said, Richard, we've got 25 minutes. What are we going to do in 25? Well, can we try? Sure, try. So they put out another song, and funny enough, we did go 5 minutes over, but we got another song called How Much Love.
Wow.
And listen to this. You Make Me Feel Like Dancing was the first single off that album, went to number 1. When I Need You was the second single off that album, number 1. The third single was the other song we cut, How Much Love. It got into the top 20 somewhere. So we did 2 hits in 3 hours and 5 minutes. And that afternoon, I cut 2 more songs with Steve Gadd, including the song Asia, the title track. That's
a hell of a day.
That's a hell of a day in the studio.
Earned your keep that day, huh? Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely one of the most memorable days in the studio.
Now, you also have had the privilege of working in a lot of different studios, a lot of very legendary studios. At some point, you decided you had to build your own.
Right.
Was this some kind of masochism on your part, or what made you decide you wanted to be a studio owner, especially because at that point you must have known at least something about the inherent headaches that came with that?
Well, yes. I think every engineer would probably love to have a studio that's a bag of tools, so to speak, that's his, everything is there because he wants it there.
Mm-hmm.
And it came to me pretty early on. I mean, by like 1976, 77, I was looking to get into a studio and work with it. I had learned enough about a lot of things that I thought I could, basically build a better mousetrap. And so when I finally decided to do it in 1980, my business manager said, I can make more money with what you've got here than a studio will, but if you feel like you have to do it, you should do it. And I said, I really do feel like I have to do it. And we went in, and I'm very, very proud of what we did. The main reason I wanted a studio was I had learned the importance of acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
That original studio, Richie Podler's studio, small and funky as it was, he had a section where it was very dead, if you wanted that vocal sound, but where the drums was very live.
Uh-huh.
And good sounding live. And then when I went out on my own and left there, I never found studios that had enough of that. So that was one thing. So when I built the studio, I went to 2 of the top acoustical engineers in the business that had built many studios. And I said, all I want is a studio like was built in the 50s or early 60s. I want a room with a sound. When you walk into it and speak, something comes back at you. And they started talking about coefficients and all kinds of technical stuff instead of just saying, yeah, we can do that. So I ended up going, as I put it, doing it myself by the seat of the pants and prayer. The studios that I had been in, the old studios and even radio studios, all used Celotex, which was the 1-inch squares with holes in it.
Yes. It's what they have in Abbey Road, isn't it?
I don't know that they have that. They have a form of that.
They have some funky acoustic tiles on the wall, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And every radio studio I'd ever been in, they're dead, but they weren't anechoic.
Mm-hmm.
And all the studios in the 70s were built with fiberglass, which is what anechoic chambers are made out of. And so when they get, a studio may not be quite anechoic, but it's got that too dead quality for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So that was the reason, and I was very fortunate. The prayer part worked because the question was, I know I want to use Celotex, but how much Celotex? And so we ended up using the right amount, and the room came out phenomenal. The other thing we did was we built the console. I knew we could build a console that would sound better than anything out there that you could buy, for one main reason, that I had learned that in analog electronics, less is more, meaning the less electronics the signal goes through, the better the more natural it's going to sound, the more of what's out there you're going to get.
That's why those old A ranges were so wonderful.
There's plenty of hardware and now, plugins that will screw things up in any way, give you character, give you this, but nothing goes the other way.
Yeah.
Nothing can go the other way. So we built a very, very simple console by listening to everything that went into it. And it, as I said, when it was 6 months in service, if only we could start over now with, but that's what happens when you have the prototype, and that's what it is. That's what you're using. But yeah, and so between the sound of the room, the great electronics, and the two microphones, it was a very, very special studio.
In fact, you did such a good job at it that you couldn't get in, right?
Right. Quite often I found myself having to get in other places because I had to run it as a business, the part that you were talking about. I had to run it as a business. So if somebody comes in, they get the time, whoever books it gets it, kind of thing. But it wasn't as big a pain running it as I thought it would be.
That's what I'm wondering, because then you have to shift in terms of type of business person you are, don't you?
Yeah. And fortunately, I said I started college in aerospace, but when I went back after 2.5-year hiatus chasing the band, I went to business school. And then actually, my dad was a Jewish lawyer. I don't know if you know what that means.
Yes.
Yeah. So, no, Dad, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm sorry. Well, a lawyer. In fact, when I talked Richie into letting me go back and actually start working in his studio less than 3 years after I'd had my aha moment, I started law school to shut my dad up because he was still on me. I got through the first semester, got started the second, the grades came out. I had all C's and 1 B, and it's because I was faking it. I couldn't do the reading, the sessions I was doing, and the classroom. So I'd been faking it, and I didn't want to fake it. I'm not a faker kind of person. So I decided I'd quit college for 2.5 years for the band. I could quit 1.5 now to see if what this engineering and hopefully producing could do. And it was about a year later, it was getting very close to enrolling for the fall semester again. And I was mixing in a studio, and the girl called in on the phone and said, "Clive Davis is on for you." And Clive Davis for me?
Me, Clive Davis?
Yeah, exactly. But, hello. He said, "Hi, Bill, Clive Davis. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine." He said, "What do you want to do with your life?" I said, "I think I'm going to go back to law school because," and literally interrupts me. He says, "No, you don't want to go to law school. I went to law school. Waste of time. If you have music in your blood, that's what you need to be doing." And I said, "Well, that's what I want to do." And the early part of this story is that he called me because one of my clients that I had been engineering for got a job there, some kind of publishing, producing job at CBS, and he told Clive about me. So when Clive called, he said, "Joel Sill tells me that you're a very talented musician and engineer." So then he went to the thing about law school and all that, and I said, "Yeah, but that is what I want to do." And he said, "Well, what if I give you a shot?" And he gave me a shot, and the legal system is very happy for that, I guarantee you.
Well,
But going back to my dad, it's funny because oh boy, because by 4 years later, I already had a couple of Grammy nominations, probably 6, 8 something gold records, and my dad sat me down and said, "Bill, when are you going to get a real job?" I went, "Dad, this is my real job, and I think I'm pretty good at it, and I really love what I'm doing. You you can't depend on music as a career." Unfortunately, he died not too long after that, and here I am 54 years later, still still loving my life.
So when are you going back to law school?
Yeah. Don't think I didn't think about it, because that's another aspect of my nature, um, is that that's a piece of unfinished business.
I can understand that.
And
Yeah.
I actually thought about it a couple of times, but never did. And then I got a divorce. My first marriage uh, ended in divorce. And when I remarried, the girl I married, funny enough, when I met her, she was in law school. And so she was in law school in Texas. And after we got engaged, I told her, you really should come to LA and do your last year there so you can see exactly what you're getting into, because she knew nothing about the music business. She loves music, which is great for me. And she has more eclectic taste than I do. She loves everything too, but she didn't know anything about
The
the life,
business.
the life.
Yeah.
And I watched so many people get divorces for a couple of different reasons. One of the biggest one to me is, that I've said about musicians and people like us, is that it's a mistress. There's no doubt about it.
Yes.
Their
Yes, it
instrument
is.
is another lover.
Mm-hmm.
And the console and music for me is, there's nothing I would rather do. And
Understood.
a lot of wives that grow up, and she was one of them, with what she planned on for a husband, was not just someone that was 13 years older and had already been married and had kids like I did, but was like dear old dad, who came home at 5 o'clock with his briefcase every day and mowed the lawn on Saturday. And that is anything but me. So it was important for her to come. Funny enough, she came and did her last year at Loyola, which is the law school I dropped out of.
Uh-huh.
And it's while she was in class a couple of times, I went in and sat in the back of the classroom to take it all in again.
Wow.
And those were not the days I decided I should go back, believe me. It was years after that.
Yeah. But I'm sure it did influence your ability to look at contracts and whatnot. So it's not a useless skill by any
No.
means, But I do think that understanding communication and human communication, human interaction is a really useful skill that, you can gain through being a good listener, being a good reader, being a good writer. I think all of that comes into play, especially when you're dealing with a lot of these eclectic personalities, shall we say?
Well, case in point is young Bill Schnee, who, as I said, I'm insecure now. I was even more insecure then. And I remember early on having a discussion with myself where I said, Bill, you have got to open your mouth and tell these people you like what they do. They're wanting to work with somebody that appreciates their art. So you've got to tell them that. I mean, that's how scared I was of people. I'm still kind of scared of people, to be honest. If you put me in a room with musicians or music people, music types, I'll do fine. But you put me in with a bunch of strangers, like our neighborhood had a get together and stuff, I'm hiding. I'm trying to hide. I don't do small talk well. I'm terrible at small talk. And,
Hmm.
my wife now, after 40 years, has helped me tremendously in that regard. She gave me a very important point. She said, ask them about themselves, because everybody wants to talk about themselves. And
It's true.
that's really, really helped me a lot.
Well, it's interesting. I wrote a column years ago about being what I call an introverted extrovert. And it's one of the points that I made was that people like us love to be around other people until we don't.
Yeah.
And there have been occasions for myself, and I'm sure probably the same is true for you, where you may be at a gathering of people and you're having a great time, and all of a sudden, it's time to get out of here. I'm done. I have reached my quota. I'm done. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, also part of just needing to recharge a little bit.
Yeah.
You take in a lot, and as per the work we do, we take in a lot. We absorb a lot, and to be able to process all that takes a certain amount of brain power, I think.
One of the things, I've always said, because of my dad telling me, Bill, when you're going to get a real job, if I ever see a psychiatrist, I'm sure that's where we'll start. But I would like, I almost would like to have somebody analyze me about some of my quirky ways. I don't know.
It makes us who we are,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, um, I've often speculated that, when we were growing up, there was no real definition of the autism spectrum,
Right.
but I feel that most artists and most highly artistic people are somewhere on the high functioning end of that spectrum. And with that comes what we used to call social awkwardness and all of
Mhm.
that, and I think that's part of just being a creative person and the way our brains are wired.
Yeah.
You
We're
know?
we're very complicated.
We are, and
And
you know what? I think that's a talent too.
yeah.
I think that's something that I have learned to be grateful for.
I know that for myself, talking to my psychiatrist in the future, please tell me about this. I have been able to hold it in on sessions at very frustrating times. Um, Richard Perry would probably have the most, although I couldn't, I have to say, I worked with him for a while, then I'd have to leave
Mhm.
and stay gone for a while. And then he'd call me, and I'd say, no, Richard, I'm not ready yet, kind of thing. And that kind of thing. But in sessions where I see things that because I shouldn't talk or, it wasn't my place or I'm being totally frustrated, I can hold it in. Yet around my wife and kids, I go off, and I hate that about myself. That I don't.
I think we all do that because we need something to vent,
Yeah,
some place to vent,
and
and
I just hate that about myself.
I think it's really a complicated process, I mean, you look at all that we are dealing with in terms of being basically cheerleader, den mother, psychologist, everything else, and on top of all that, midwife. We're helping to birth these.
Yeah, and so speaking about my insecurities and all that earlier, and one of the other things I had to learn in no short order was what you just kind of alluded to, psychologist. I mean, I just want to make music. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
dealing with an artist and I just want to, but wait a minute, I'm there. I've always said it's a servant's role. Engineering and producing is a servant's role. I'm there to
absolutely.
serve the artist and their music. But how do I best do that if I'm trying to get the job done? And, sometimes it is psychology. It's
Big time.
and that wasn't natural for me at all. I learned a tremendous amount about that from Richard Perry.
I'll bet. I mean, I think for me, what did it was I was working with one particular artist and there was this song and the lyrics were very cryptic. And at one point I asked her, I said, what is this about? And she started explaining to me that the song was about having been attacked while she was asleep and essentially
True,
molested.
true story.
Yes, true
Oh,
story.
okay. Not a
Uh,
dream.
but no, and it was but the lyrics were very, um, it was not like obvious. It was not, laid out. There were a lot of gaps that you could fill in any way you wanted to. And once I understood this, we went in and completely recut the song because there was this really, the verses were sort of this sleep, the heartbeat, and we laid that into the kick and the bass pattern, and then the choruses were this attack, and it was time for the big guitars to come in and stuff like that. But it was something where the arrangement was dictated by this understanding that I had gained of what went into it psychologically. And I think that was such a revelation for me to
Yeah,
realize how deeply we get into their psyche
yeah,
if we're going to really do a good job.
yeah. There's nothing worse than uh, doing what you did, having to ask an artist, "What does this mean?" It's just, because because I'm thinking if I don't understand it, the audience isn't going to understand it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
But sometimes it's just some allegory, and the overall sense comes through. Uh, but maybe some couple of lines just don't make sense, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's all about that interaction, isn't it?
it is. It is. And I think just understanding another human being on that level. And, these artists are so vulnerable. And in a sense, we have to make ourselves just as vulnerable in order to get into the dirt with them in a way.
Yep.
So that actually is a nice segue into what I like to wrap with, which is the idea that here we are now. You obviously have had a lengthy career, during this lengthy career, the technology has evolved, the creative process has evolved, as we were alluding to earlier with multi-tracking and everything, and the way we listen to music, consume music, everything has changed. What would you tell 15-year-old you in this day and age?
Well, um, I've approached engineering as a musician, not as an engineer. The technical stuff came easy to me, as I said earlier. The technical thing was easy. And as it turned out, the the manipulation turned out to be pretty easy on from the musical level. But the 15-year-old, like I said, this part of my frustration was watching these videos is that I never see enough videos that are talking kind of like we are about what goes on, having nothing to do with the technicality, but the musicality and what goes into the relationships and the musicality. Um, when I talk to schools with young guys coming up to do what I've done, I always end with something someone else came up with first, which is take advantage of anything that comes along. You may have a certain desire of where you think you're going, where you're headed, but because the opportunities are so much fewer and far betweener than they were when I was young, something in a kind of related, first of all, gets you going because you never know how one thing can lead to another. That happens all the time. And who knows? Maybe you'll find something that you're actually better suited for than what you thought you were doing. Um, and then whatever it takes as you get into it, because by 15, they already have, they're already making records. They already have, if at least GarageBand and probably something bigger,
Yeah.
and they're already making records. And another thing I think that's important, it happens, I find them all the time, is that the majority, I don't know, of young kids that go back and listen to the 70s and into the 80s when music was in its golden era, and things were, things that are a push of a button now, we had to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours doing kind of thing. But it's not as much that as the fact that the musicality of what's there, for whatever reason or reasons that it was there. And we happen to be overall right now in a period where there's um, a lot of very simple chord progressions because production is more important than the song itself. I had to correct my wife years ago, who, as I said, knew nothing, wasn't trained in any way. She would say something about, "Oh, that's a great record. I mean, a great song." And I wish I could think of one right now, but it was like some disco song, and it wasn't a great song. It was a great record.
Uh-huh.
It served its purpose,
Yep.
and I had to correct her that, the song will still be great, played on a piano or guitar, however it was originally conceived, and a voice. And if that can get to you, then that's a great song.
Yeah.
But if it takes production, nothing wrong with that. We're making records, but great songwriters uh, all write great songs, and not every record is a great song. So,
It's true. It's true. And I think, that, yeah, you brought up something also interesting that I have always been fascinated about, the fact that things are so much easier now, in terms of pushing a button, in terms of plugins and whatnot. And I think to a certain extent, it makes people more derivative because part of the power of the creative process is discovering those limits and pushing those limits. And we don't have those limits as much anymore. We don't have a limited number of tracks. We don't have a limited number of effects. We don't
right.
have a lot of things that held us back. And so, it's interesting. I had a great conversation a while back with Craig Anderton, and Craig made a statement that I really loved. He said, "Everybody is asking, how do I? And the question should be more, what if?"
Mm, yeah.
Because everybody can create something that is derivative of something we've heard before.
Yeah.
But the real true stuff is the stuff that comes through that is pushing those limits, I
Yeah.
think.
We started, when you talk about the technology, early on, I realized that to have a long career, I was going to have to protect my ears. So I never monitor loud. I always wear earplugs, to at concerts. I miss a lot of what I'm hearing or seeing because of it, whatnot. But I'm very happy about it. So I didn't realize then that eyes would be as important as ears these days, but they are, and there's something to that. That's a whole nother subject, I guess. But just to touch on it, um, it 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 was a lot easier or better, not even easier because it's easy now, but you're constantly using your eyes in the control room now as well as your ears instead of before, there were VU meters and you might glance to make sure nothing was slamming in the red, but by and large, you're just thinking about what you're doing and if you should brighten something or, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's a lot harder today.
I always used to tell my students, close your eyes when you're mixing,
Yeah.
because then it cuts off one sense and you have to focus more on the others.
So, but it's all good as long as we're serving the music,
Yeah.
and that has changed and may well change again.
Well, I think it continues to change. I think it continues to evolve. Obviously, even at this point, we're still looking for that unique talent, that something that speaks to us. I'm
Right.
sure you still are as well, and maybe we capture it differently, but I still think the talent plug-in doesn't exist and never will.
Right.
And so it's good that there are people who understand and appreciate that creative side of it.
Yeah. Amen.
And you have dedicated a great career to that.
Thank you.
And a lot of us are very indebted to you for a lot of the work that you've done.
Well, all I can say is I've loved every minute of it, and I'm so fortunate that at my age, and it's pretty bad. No, at my age, I'm in very, very good health, and more important, well, not more importantly, and just as important, I have every bit of emotion I had the first time I walked in 1965 and walked into the Capitol Records to record my band with my band. Uh, I have every bit of that same emotion today when I start a project or whatever it is, or get something to mix. So I'm still doing great, and I plan on doing it. My my joke has always been, I want to drop over dead on the console. Be some push the talk back and saying, guys, the B flat and the beef, and they can finish it without me after the ambulance leaves.
Oh, man. Well, I don't know if I'd necessarily wish that, but the rest of it, yeah, you are truly blessed and glad to see you still around and doing it, man.
Me too.
Bill Schnee, thank you for being my guest.
It's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.